I never thought I would feel this way about the man I used to call my stepfather. My mother remarried when I was 15. He was quiet, reserved, always keeping a polite distance, not cold, but never close. I didn't hate him, but I didn't like him either. To me, he was just the man in the house, nothing more. I grew up, moved away for school, rarely came home. But when I turned 20, my mother took a long-term assignment out of town. That left just the two of us in the house. Strangely, I didn't feel uncomfortable. In fact, I felt safe. We were both good at silence. No one invaded the other's space. In the mornings, he made tea. At night, I cleaned the kitchen. Everything was quiet, and yet somehow, something in the air felt heavier than usual. I started noticing the smallest things. The way he gently slid the teacup toward me, instead of pushing it across the table. The way he looked away when I walked past in a slightly thin pajama shirt. The way he glanced at me through the rearview mirror while driving not often, but when he did, our eyes would meet for just 1 second too long. No one said anything. No one did anything. But I knew I was starting to feel something I shouldn't. And I knew he felt it too. One rainy night, I woke up around 2 a.m. The house was dark and still, with only the sound of rain tapping against the roof. I went downstairs for water and found him already there, sitting alone under the dim kitchen light. He wore an old t-shirt, holding a mug that had long gone cold. I didn't ask why he was awake. He didn't ask me, either. I sat down across from him, poured myself a glass. When I reached for it, my fingers brushed his just for a moment. Neither of us pulled away. I could feel my palm heat up. My lips were dry. I whispered, "I should go to bed." He nodded without looking at me. But before I stood up, he said quietly, "You've really grown." I didn't respond. My throat tightened. I turned and walked back to my room quickly, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on my side, back to the door, blanket pulled over my head. But I could still feel his eyes behind me like a lingering touch. I dreamt he touched my hair soft as wind. I dreamt I leaned against his shoulder, saying nothing. I dreamt he walked away, and I stood frozen, silent, aching, unwilling to call him back. The next morning, he said nothing about that night. Neither did I. But when he placed the cup of tea in front of me, I noticed his hand tremble slightly. And in that fleeting moment, I realized we hadn't done anything. But we'd already gone too far. It wasn't love. It wasn't lust. It was the quiet acknowledgement of something unnamed, something that grew louder the more we tried to silence it. I didn't know if it was wrong or just something no one dared to name. All I knew was this. For the first time, I felt seen, not as my mother's daughter, not as the child in the house, but as me, a woman, alive, trembling before something forbidden. And that terrified me more than anything. But it also made me never want to walk away from it. The air felt too still that morning. Not the kind of silence that soothes you, but the kind that presses against your chest like the whole house was holding its breath. I came down a little later than usual. I had spent half the night tossing, turning, reliving that moment in the kitchen, the brush of our hands, the look in his eyes, the words that had no business lingering in my head. He was already at the table when I entered. A fresh cup of tea sat where he always placed it, just slightly to the left of center, like it always was. Nothing had changed. Except everything had. He looked up when I walked in, and I saw the hesitation in his eyes, subtle, but there. The way his gaze lingered for a half-second too long, like he was waiting to see what I would do. I mumbled, "Morning." He nodded. "Morning." I sat down. We both reached for our cups at the same time. This time, we didn't touch. Maybe on purpose. The silence between us wasn't awkward. Not yet, but it was charged. Like a storm building just beyond the horizon, and we both knew it. He didn't ask how I slept. I didn't ask why he'd been awake. We just sat there, pretending to sip tea while pretending nothing had happened. But I felt it. I felt the way his eyes flicked toward me when I wasn't looking. I felt the way he shifted in his seat, as if trying to create space, or maybe just escape it. I felt the weight of the words we didn't say pressing against the walls. And I hated how much I wanted him to say something. After breakfast, I went to the living room and curled up on the couch with a book I wasn't reading. He passed by once, carrying a basket of laundry, said nothing. I said nothing back. But when he returned, he stopped in the doorway. I looked up. "I can take care of dinner tonight," he said. I nodded too quickly. "Okay." He hesitated. His eyes searched mine for something, maybe permission, maybe warning, before he turned and disappeared down the hall. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that. I thought I'd be relieved if we both ignored what happened, if we acted like it was just a strange moment in the middle of a long night. But I wasn't relieved. I was restless, because that moment in the kitchen hadn't felt strange. It had felt real, honest, like I had finally slipped out of the skin of who I was supposed to be, and for once been seen as something more. And now the mask was back on. The routine, the small nods and polite silences. It all felt tighter, more constricting than before. Around noon, I went into the laundry room to grab a towel and found him there, folding clothes. He didn't look up. I didn't move. He spoke first, softly, about last night. I froze. He looked at me, not apologetic, not ashamed, just exposed. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." I opened my mouth to say, "You didn't." But the words caught in my throat. Too easy, too fast, too honest. So instead I said, "It was just a late. We were both tired." He nodded. But we both knew it was a lie. And still, he smiled that small, quiet smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Right, just tired." I turned to leave, towel clutched tight in my fist. But before I stepped out, I said without turning back, "You don't have to pretend nothing happened." He didn't respond. He didn't have to. The silence that followed was louder than anything either of us could have said. The weather turned colder that week. Not by much, just enough that I started wearing long sleeves indoors. Just enough that the windows fogged slightly in the morning, like the house was breathing slower. We talked more than usual, but never about the thing we couldn't stop thinking about. Instead, we spoke in careful fragments. About the heater acting up. About whether the tomatoes in the fridge had gone soft. About the neighbor's dog barking too much at night. Safe things. Surface things. The kind of conversations people have when they're afraid of what might slip out if they stop pretending. And yet, beneath every word was a question neither of us asked. And beneath every silence, a tension we no longer knew how to hide. One afternoon, I came downstairs to find him changing a light bulb. He was on a stepladder, arms reaching upward, shirt lifting just slightly at the waist. It was the kind of image that should have meant nothing. A domestic moment. A man doing something useful around the house. But I watched him too long. And when he noticed, he didn't speak. He just looked at me, not confused, not surprised, like he already knew I'd been watching. He stepped down slowly. "Can you hand me the box?" he asked, voice calm. I nodded, too fast. My hand brushed his when I passed it over. Neither of us moved. That touch, fleeting and ordinary on the surface, lingered like something heavier. "Thanks," he said, voice quiet. "Sure," I murmured, looking away. I left the room, pulse fluttering, not because of what happened, but because of how easy it would have been to let more happen. That night, I found one of my old journals tucked away in my closet. I flipped it open, skimming messy entries from when I was 16, angry rants about school, about boys who didn't look at me, about my mom's wedding. And then I saw a line that stopped me cold. "I don't think I hate him. I think I just don't know where to put him." I closed the book and held it to my chest. Maybe that's what this still was. Not love, not lust. Just confusion wrapped in quiet hours. Just two people orbiting the same silence, too careful to say what they meant. The next evening, I passed by his room. The door was cracked, light spilling onto the hallway carpet. He was sitting on the bed, reading glasses low on his nose, expression unreadable. He looked up when he saw me, and again, we just stared. I could have kept walking. I should have. But instead, I leaned against the doorway and said, "I used to think you didn't like me." He raised an eyebrow. "Why would you think that? You never looked at me." "Not really." He set the book down. "That wasn't because I didn't want to. It was because I knew I shouldn't." My breath caught. "Do you still feel that way?" I asked. A long pause. Then he said quietly, "Every day." He didn't invite me in. I didn't take a step forward. We stayed on opposite sides of the door like two people standing at the edge of a bridge, afraid of what's below. And yet, in that distance, I felt more exposed than if he'd touched me. Sometimes, the most dangerous things are the ones we almost do. The words we almost say. The moments that nearly break us but don't. Not yet. I thought I was imagining things. The way our conversations grew longer, but said less. The way our silences pressed in closer, tighter, no longer peaceful, but expectant. Everything between us felt stretched thin. Like the air could split open if one of us moved too suddenly. He started cooking more. I started staying home more. Not on purpose, not obviously, but something kept us in the same rooms, near the same light, breathing the same breath. It was a Tuesday night when the line finally shifted. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, washing the last of the dishes. He stepped in behind me close, but not too close, just close enough for me to feel the warmth of him at my back. "You missed a spot," he said softly, reaching over my shoulder. Our hands touched on the rim of the plate, and that was it. Not a grab, not a pull, just skin to skin, his fingers brushing mine with that impossible mix of intention and hesitation. I didn't flinch. I didn't move. Neither did he. The room stopped breathing. I set the plate down. My hands were still in the sink, but my whole body was somewhere else. He didn't step back. I turned slightly, just enough to see him from the corner of my eye. His face was closer than it had ever been. His eyes, steady, searching, almost asking. "This is dangerous," I said. But my voice wasn't pulling away. It was trembling forward. He didn't touch me again. He just stood there, looking at me like no one ever had, like he saw every scar I'd hidden, every version of myself I'd tried to mute. "Then tell me to stop," he said. I couldn't. Not because I didn't want to, but because there was nothing to stop. The crime hadn't happened. Only the wanting had. And is that a crime too? I stepped away first. Slowly, my feet unsteady. I grabbed a towel to dry my hands, even though they were already dry. He remained where he was, watching, but not pushing. "Good night," I whispered. "Good night," he said. I went upstairs, heart pounding so loud I was sure he could hear it through the walls. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, palms still burning where he'd touched me. And for the first time, I said it quietly, only to myself. I want him, not as a father figure, not as some replacement for the man who left when I was little. I wanted him, the man who saw through me, the man who never looked at me the way anyone else had until now. And somehow, in that one touch, I knew this wasn't going away, even if we never crossed the line, even if we never said another word about it. It was already happening. He avoided me for 2 days. Not dramatically, not with distance I could point at, but in smaller, sharper ways. The chair at the table was suddenly farther away. He left earlier for errands. The tea was made and waiting, but he was never in the room when I came down. The touch in the kitchen had changed something. Not because it led anywhere it didn't, but because we both knew what it could have led to. And now he was drawing lines in places that used to feel invisible. On the third night, I found him in the garage, fixing a drawer that hadn't been broken in months. His sleeves were rolled up, hands busy, pretending to be too occupied to look at me when I stepped in. "The drawer?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Thought I'd take care of it," he said. "It's been loose for a while. It was fine. Was it?" I didn't reply. Neither did he. The silence between us wasn't cold, it was aching. "You're avoiding me," I said. He paused. Didn't deny it. "I'm keeping distance," he answered carefully. "Same thing." "No," he said, still not looking at me. "Avoiding is selfish. Distance is responsible." I laughed under my breath. Not because it was funny, because it was cruelly, tragically logical. "And what if I don't want responsible?" I asked. "What if I want real?" That made him look up. His eyes met mine, full of tension, full of fear. "Real hurts people," he said. "Real breaks trust, breaks homes. Real also heals. Real sees us," I replied, stepping closer, just enough for him to feel it. But he turned away, set the screwdriver down with more force than necessary. "You're young," he said quietly. "You think feeling something means you're supposed to act on it. Don't reduce me to age," I snapped. "Don't pretend this is just me being naive." His shoulders stiffened. I walked around the bench and stood in front of him. "You felt it too," I said. "You still do." He didn't answer. But his silence was soaked in confirmation. I waited for him to deny it. I wanted him to lie, to save us both from the truth hanging between us like smoke. But he didn't. Instead, he said, "Even if I do, we don't get to follow it. Some feelings you live with, not live out." That broke me a little, because I realized then he wasn't denying what we were. He was choosing to survive it. I nodded, stepped back, and when I turned to leave, I heard him say barely above a whisper, "It would have been so easy." I didn't reply, because he was right. It would have been so easy. Too easy. And that's why we couldn't. The house was quiet again. Not like before, not the peaceful quiet we'd grown used to, but the kind that felt like something had been removed. Something that used to hum softly between us. Since that night in the garage, we hadn't said anything meaningful. We went back to small things, predictable gestures. Two people who had, very briefly, stepped too close to a flame, and now were pretending we hadn't felt the heat. But pretending isn't forgetting. It was a Thursday night when it finally slipped, not in the form of a touch, but in words that neither of us had meant to say. The rain came again, soft and steady. I was curled on the couch with a book I couldn't focus on, legs tucked under me, the lamp beside me glowing dimly. He walked in with a cup of tea and set it on the table, like always. But this time, he didn't leave right away. He stood behind the couch for a moment. I could feel his presence, the way he breathed slower when he didn't want to speak first. I turned to him, cautious. "You okay?" He nodded, hesitated, then said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we met differently?" My chest tightened. I looked up. "What do you mean?" He sat down, not too close, but not far either. Just enough for me to hear the tension in his voice. "I mean, if I wasn't married to your mother, if we'd met as strangers, just two people crossing paths." I stared at him. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The question wasn't inappropriate, but it was too real. Too close to something I'd only ever dared to whisper inside my own head. "You shouldn't say that," I replied softly. "I know," he said, "but I've thought about it." The rain tapped against the windows, steady and unbothered. My heart was anything but. I sat up straighter. "You're not supposed to feel this way," I said, even though I wasn't accusing him. "Neither am I." "But we do," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Even if we don't want to." There was nothing seductive in his tone, nothing coy. It wasn't a flirtation. It was grief. Quiet, private grief for something that could never happen but still almost did. I looked down at my hands. "If we met at a bookstore," I murmured, "you would have asked what I was reading. I would have lied and said something smarter than I actually picked." He smiled. "You'd roll your eyes if I recommended anything classic, and I'd pretend not to notice when you kept glancing at my hands." I laughed. It startled me, the sound. I hadn't expected it. "You have nice hands," I said. He looked at me, and for a moment, everything in the room slowed down. "And you're not a little girl," he said. "You haven't been for a long time." Something in me wanted to cry when he said that. Because it wasn't just recognition, it was permission. Acknowledgement. The kind of sentence that rewrites who you're allowed to be in someone's eyes. But I didn't cry. I just swallowed. "We can't change how we met," I said. He nodded. "I know, but it doesn't make it easier," I added. He leaned back on the couch, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were tired. "Do you think we're bad people?" I paused. That was the question I hadn't wanted either of us to ask, because once spoken, it lingered. I answered honestly. "No," I said, "but I think we're standing too close to a door we both know shouldn't open." He nodded. "And what if we opened it just enough to say goodbye to what's behind it?" "That's not how doors work," I said gently. "They don't half open." Silence again. I looked over at him, the man who'd made me tea for months, who repaired drawers that didn't need fixing, who knew how I liked my coffee and how I hated being told to calm down when I was overwhelmed. He was not my father. He was not a stranger. He was something in between. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous place to be. "We'll be okay," I said, mostly to convince myself. He gave a slow nod. "One day, maybe," he said. I stood up, wrapping the throw blanket tighter around my shoulders. "Good night," I whispered. "Good night," he echoed. As I climbed the stairs, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just felt hollow, like I had loved something that never got the chance to live, like I had mourned it before it ever began. But I also felt something else, something quiet, and perhaps even more powerful. I was no longer invisible. The storm came without warning. One moment, the air was thick and still, heavy with heat. The next, thunder split the sky, and the house shuddered as rain lashed against the windows. The power flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the glow of a few scattered candles. I was in my room, listening to the downpour, when I heard his footsteps in the hall. Steady, hesitant, stopping just outside my door. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was louder than the storm. Finally, his voice, "Are you awake?" I swallowed, pulling the blanket tighter. "Yes." A pause. Then, "Can I come in?" My heart raced. I knew I should say no. I should tell him to wait until morning, that there was nothing we needed to talk about, but the word never came. Instead, I stood and opened the door. He was there, candle in hand, shadows playing across his face. The storm's roar filled the space between us, but in that moment, the louder sound was my own pulse. He didn't step inside. I didn't invite him. We just stood there, separated by the narrow frame of wood. "I couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Me neither," I admitted. He shifted, the candle trembling just slightly in his hand. "This is dangerous." "I know," I whispered. "So why are you here?" His eyes searched mine, not pleading, not demanding, just searching. For courage, for release, for something I didn't know if either of us could give. "Because pretending doesn't work anymore," he said. The words hit me harder than thunder. I leaned against the doorframe, close enough to feel the heat of the candle, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes. He smelled faintly of rain, of earth and soap, ordinary, human. And yet nothing about this felt ordinary. "We can't," I began. "I know," he cut in. "But do you feel it? Tell me you don't." I closed my eyes. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say no, to end this here, to lock the door and bury the truth under duty and silence. But the lie stuck in my throat. "I feel it," I whispered. The air between us shifted. He exhaled, slow and heavy, as if I'd released a weight he'd been carrying for months. His free hand lifted slightly, not to touch me, but to rest against the doorframe, inches from my shoulder. The space shrank. The storm raged on outside, but inside, the world was impossibly still. For one trembling moment, I thought he might close the door behind him, that we might step into something neither of us could undo. Instead, he whispered, "This door, it's the only thing saving us." I looked at him, at the raw honesty in his face, the grief etched into every line. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that the door wasn't saving us, it was breaking us, splitting us in two, leaving us both half alive. But I didn't, because I knew he was right. If he stepped inside, we would fall. And if I stepped out, I might never come back. So I did the only thing I could. Slowly, gently, I pressed my palm against the edge of the door, creating distance where there was none. "Good night," I said, my voice unsteady. His eyes lingered on me, burning with all the words neither of us would ever speak. Then, slowly, he stepped back, lowering the candle. "Good night," he replied. I closed the door. On the other side, I heard him pause long enough that I could feel him standing there, his breath almost audible in the silence. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I leaned against the wood, trembling, heart aching in my chest. That door was still closed, but something inside me had already swung wide open. And I knew there was no closing it again. The storm ended by morning, but the silence did not. When I came down to the kitchen, the house smelled of coffee and damp earth. He was already there, leaning against the counter, mug in hand. He looked tired, not in the way of someone who hadn't slept, but in the way of someone who had carried too much in the dark. "Coffee?" he asked, his voice even. Too even. I nodded, sitting at the table. The mug he placed before me was warm, familiar, but my fingers trembled when they touched it, as if the heat came from more than the drink. We didn't mention the door. We didn't mention the storm. But every glance, every pause, carried its weight. I wanted to ask him if he'd stood there after I shut him out. I wanted to tell him I had pressed my ear to the wood, listening for his breath. I wanted to confess that my body had burned with the urge to pull the door open and let it all happen. But I didn't, because sometimes silence is safer than honesty. After breakfast, he went outside to check on the yard. I followed later, pretending I needed air. The grass glistened with rain, the sky still heavy with gray clouds. He was bent over, pulling a fallen branch away from the fence. When he straightened, our eyes met across the wet lawn. And something inside me broke, because in his face, I didn't just see him. I saw myself reflected back, raw and unguarded. The longing, the restraint, the ache of wanting what you cannot have. I had spent years invisible, blending into the background of other people's lives. A daughter, a student, a shadow. Never the one looked at like this. He wasn't just looking at me. He was seeing me. And in his eyes, I saw the woman I had been afraid to admit I was becoming. Not someone's child, not someone's responsibility, but a person who could be wanted, who could be dangerous. He dropped the branch, wiped his hands on his jeans, and said softly, "You shouldn't be out here. It's still wet." It was nothing an ordinary sentence, but in his tone was everything: concern, care, and something else we didn't name. I stepped closer anyway. The rain-damp grass soaked my shoes. When I reached him, I stopped, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough for the memory of last night's door to pulse between us. "Why do we do this?" I asked. My voice was low, trembling. "Why do we keep circling something we both know we can't touch?" He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Because sometimes wanting is all we're allowed." The words settled heavy in the air. I felt them in my chest, sharp and true. I wanted to argue, to scream that wanting wasn't enough, that silence wasn't enough, that I didn't want to spend the rest of my life knowing I had touched the edge of something real and turned away. But I also knew he was right. So instead, I whispered, "When I look at you, I see the person I didn't think I could be." His jaw tightened. His eyes softened. "And when I look at you," he said, "I see the man I tried so hard not to be." For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. The sky above us opened slightly, light piercing through the clouds, casting everything in a fragile, golden glow. I lifted my hand, not thinking, just moving. I brushed a drop of rain from his sleeve. My fingers lingered too long. He didn't flinch, but he didn't reach back either. We stood there, suspended between choice and consequence. Then he stepped back. "You should go inside," he said. His voice cracked on the last word, just enough for me to hear the truth behind it. I nodded, though every part of me resisted. I turned, walked back toward the house. My heart ached with every step, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back until I reached the porch. He was still standing there, staring at the ground, as if the grass itself held the answers neither of us could find. That night, alone in my bed, I pressed my hand against my chest and felt the echo of his words. Sometimes, wanting is all we're allowed. And for the first time, I understood. It wasn't just him I wanted. It was the version of myself I saw reflected in him. The woman who was alive, who was burning, who was real, even if the world never knew her, even if he never touched her. The house was asleep, but I wasn't. The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:04 a.m. I had been staring at it for what felt like hours, counting the seconds as if time might eventually dull the ache in my chest. It didn't. I got up, restless, bare feet cold against the wooden floor. The storm had long passed, but the air was heavy, humid, as if the house itself had been holding on to the memory. I padded downstairs, hoping the quiet of the living room would soothe me. He was already there, sitting on the couch, a single lamp casting soft gold over his face. He wasn't reading. He wasn't drinking tea. He was just sitting, awake, waiting for something he couldn't name. Our eyes met. Neither of us looked away. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, my voice a whisper in the dark. "No," he said. I crossed the room, slow, measured, as though each step might set off an alarm. I sat at the far end of the couch, curling my knees beneath me. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward, it was unbearable. Finally, he broke it. I keep telling myself this will pass. I swallowed. Does it feel like it's passing? His gaze dropped to his hands, clasped tight, the knuckles white. Number. The word fell between us like a confession. I wanted to be strong, to say something safe, to remind us of all the reasons we couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, but the words died in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we stopped fighting it?" He looked at me then. Really looked. His eyes were heavy, desperate, but soft, like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to fall but praying for someone to hold him back. "Every night," he whispered. My breath caught. We stared at each other, the air between us so thick it felt alive. His hand twitched, just slightly, on the cushion. Mine did the same. A slow magnetic pull, not enough to close the space, but enough to make my whole body tremble with the wanting. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. His voice was muffled. "This isn't fair to you." "Don't," I said quickly. "Don't make it sound like pity. That's not what this island." His head lifted, and there it was again, that raw honesty that undid me every time. "Number. It's not pity," he said. "It's the most dangerous kind of truth." My hand moved before I realized it, reaching across the small space, fingers brushing his. Not a full touch, just the ghost of one, but enough. His head tilted back, eyes closing, as though the contact alone might undo him. "If you don't want this," I said, my voice trembling, "pull away." He didn't. Seconds stretched into eternity. Our hands hovered, almost together, almost entwined. Then his eyes opened, meeting mine. His lips parted not in a smile, not in words, but in something caught between restraint and surrender. The world narrowed. Just him, just me, just this unbearable almost. And then he stood. Abrupt, sharp. The spell cracked like glass. "I can't," he said, voice low, hoarse. "If I start, I won't stop." I sat frozen, my hands still hanging in the space he'd left behind. "You think I don't know that?" I whispered. He turned toward me, eyes full of sorrow and fire all at once. "That's why I have to stop for both of us." The room spun with the weight of it. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to sit back down, to admit that stopping felt like tearing my own skin apart. But I didn't. Instead, I watched him walk away, each step heavy, deliberate, until I heard his door close down the hall. I stayed on the couch, shaking, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. Because for the first time, I understood. It wasn't the distance that hurt. It was the closeness, the unbearable nearness of what almost happened. And that night, more than any other, I realized we hadn't crossed the line, but we were already lost. The days that followed felt strange. Not colder, not hostile, but fragile, as if every word we spoke might shatter something neither of us could repair. We moved carefully around each other. Breakfasts became shorter. The small gestures, the tea, the blanket, the way his eyes found mine in the mirror, all remained. But they were different now, measured, weighted. A performance of normalcy we both knew was false. And then came the news. My mother was coming home earlier than expected. When he told me, we stood in the kitchen, the late afternoon light spilling across the counter. His voice was calm, almost relieved. Mine caught in my throat. "That's good," I said. "Yes," he answered. Neither of us smiled. The week passed quickly. I packed my things, folded clothes, put books back in boxes. He fixed the squeaky hinge on my suitcase, even though I didn't ask. We said nothing of storms or doors or the nights we hadn't slept. On my last evening in the house, I found him outside on the porch, sitting in the quiet glow of the setting sun. I stepped out, barefoot, the wood warm under my feet. He didn't look at me at first. Just sipped his tea, eyes on the horizon. I sat beside him. Close, but not too close. "This feels strange," I said softly. "It should," he replied. The cicadas buzzed in the trees. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, then stopped. The world felt ordinary again, and that was the cruelest part because nothing in me was ordinary anymore. I wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Did he regret it? Did he think of me when I wasn't there? Would he remember me after I left? Instead, I asked only one. Do you ever wish things had been different? He finally turned his head, met my eyes. Every day. I felt the words settle deep inside me, sharp and tender all at once. We didn't touch. Not even once. We didn't need to. The ache between us was its own language. The sun dipped lower, painting everything in gold. He set his cup down, leaned back, and sighed. "You'll be fine," he said. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled faintly. "You don't believe that." He looked at me steady, unwavering. "I do. I've seen it." And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about love, not in the way stories define it. It wasn't about lust either. It was about being seen, about finding in one impossible place the reflection of who I really was. That night, I barely slept. In the morning, the sound of my mother's car pulling into the driveway cut through the silence. He carried my suitcase to the door. I followed, heart heavy with words I would never say. At the threshold, he paused. Hand still on the handle, he looked at me one last time. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For letting me see you." I didn't answer. I couldn't. He opened the door and light flooded in. My mother's voice called cheerfully from outside, unaware of the fragile world we were leaving behind. I stepped out. The air was cool, bright, alive. He stood in the doorway, watching, and for a moment, time slowed. Our eyes met, and I understood. This was the goodbye. Not dramatic, not spoken, but final all the same. I walked to the car, hugged my mother, smiled as though nothing had happened. When I glanced back, the door was closed. The house looked exactly as it always had. But I knew I would never see it the same way again. Even now, when I think of him, it isn't the words I remember. It isn't the almost touches, or the silence, or the storm. It's the way I saw myself in his eyes, not as a child, not as someone's daughter, but as a woman. Alive, wanting, real. And that, perhaps, is the most dangerous kind of love. The kind that never crosses the line, but changes you forever. If you've made it this far, maybe something in this story stirred something in you too. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel because sometimes the stories we least expect are the ones that stay with us the longest. And where are you watching from? What city do you live in? I'd love to know because sometimes a new chapter begins in a place we never thought we'd end up.